I really appreciate you taking this time out and yeah, just talking to me about this case. It really just caught me by surprise. And I'm sure you know this case kind of blew up again more recently when Files of the Unexplained dropped because everybody saw that on Netflix. And I actually hadn't heard of this case until I watched that. So that was the first thing that introduced me. And it was largely because a listener of mine reached out and was like, "Hey, have you watched this docu-series yet? You should cover the Yuba County Five. It's really interesting and disturbing." And then my mom asked me about it, said the same thing. So it's really gripping people. And then I
Yeah,
read your book. So
thank you.
yeah, I just have so many questions.
A lot of
But
people do when they discover the case, so that's why I'm here.
yeah, I really appreciate it. I guess my first question is, and this is also just for people who haven't read your book and don't know, what introduced you to this case and what gripped you about it?
I first heard about the case 2018 when it started to come back into the spotlight after being buried for 40 years. So I was watching Criminally Listed on YouTube. I had discovered that there was a whole world of original true crime content on YouTube. I started watching channels and I really liked Criminally Listed, and the 100th episode was Viewer's Choice. That was an episode where people were able to submit their favorite cases, and the final case was titled Gary Mathias and the Boys. Immediately, I felt connected to the case and I was really interested in the story. And it was a really haunting tale of what happened in 1978. And I'm someone who grew up in the 80s and watched stuff like Unsolved Mysteries when it was on NBC, and really liked stories of the unexplained, stuff like that. And I thought, oh, have I heard about this case before? Did I watch it on Unsolved Mysteries? Was it on something like Dateline or one of those cold case shows? But no, it was never televised. So I thought, well, this case is really interesting. And with YouTube and the algorithm, it keeps, suggesting channels like Bedtime Stories did an animated version of this, and some other YouTube true crime content channels had something similar going on with the case. So the more I heard about it, the more fascinated I was, and thought, well, I'll just read a book. And there's nothing at Amazon, nothing at the library. By 2019, I decided, well, I'll try writing a book. But I'm kind of booked 2019, no pun intended. But um, I thought, oh, well, 2020 is a good year to just like kick back and relax and just do whatever and write a book. But the world had different plans.
Hmm.
But I did get started doing research in 2020, which was good. And I decided to research the case. I started reaching out to the families, law enforcement. Cynthia Gorney, who's in the Files of the Unexplained docu-series on Netflix, I spoke to her. Then 2021, I went to California to research the case and look at the case files. That's where I met Brian Bernardus, who's also on the show. He showed me the Plumas area where the men disappeared. Um, it was a great experience, and I mean that's how I got into it. It was just one of those things where a story just kind of comes out of nowhere, really captures my attention, and I
Hmm.
decided to write a book.
I don't know if I knew you got to go to the Plumas. That's really interesting.
I did it twice. The first time was with the Yuba County Sheriff's Department. They offered to take me, and I was happy because I was going to drive myself, and I didn't feel like driving by myself because I didn't really
Hmm.
know the area. The second time was with the film crew for Files of the Unexplained.
Hmm.
I actually wasn't supposed to go that day, but they brought me along for probably like backup just in case they wanted some information on the case. But the person who was going to drive wasn't able. They looked at me and said, "Can you drive us up to the Plumas?" And I said, "Sure." And we went up there. It was a long trip, but we made it happen. My first trip with Yuba County was during the day, and this one was during the night. So it was good to see the area, during two different times of the day, and
Hmm.
very unusual experience overall. But it's a nice area, but it's also very haunting knowing what happened up there. So it was nice getting up into the Plumas to see the area near the Daniels Inc. campground, or not Daniels Inc. I'm sorry, Rogers Cow Camp, the area
Right.
where the car was parked.
Do you know if those trailers are still there where they found Ted Weir?
No, those were torn down at some point, and I don't know when. I
Hmm.
I talked to someone who was with the Forestry Service, and their understanding was the trailers are no longer standing.
Hmm.
Just like the place Mountain House, where Joseph Shones had a beer or had some beers before heading off near Rogers Cow Camp. That place is also gone, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
damage from the wildfires. So
Okay.
it so I think Mountain House is a victim of the one of the wildfires, but the trailers were taken down at some point, and I just don't know the date.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was gonna ask if it kind of gave you an eerie feeling, if it felt different being out there and just knowing what the men went through. I would imagine that would be kind of unsettling. Like it's in nature, like you said, it's beautiful, but it must feel really strange just knowing what happened.
It was one of those experiences where you're enjoying the moment, but at the same time, you know where you're heading because of the story. Um, and it was, both drives. It's clear that the amount of time it took to get from the Marysville area in Yuba County to areas like Rogers Cow Camp, you knew the more you kept driving that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't some mistake. Something was going on. We don't know what happened. And I've been working with the families and talking to law enforcement and other people interested in the case. Like, what happened? Like, this doesn't make any sense. They had plenty of opportunities to turn around the more you drive through the Plumas, and it, it's such a mystery.
That is the biggest thing that I think bothers me the most about this case is I cannot even begin to understand why they went up there in the first place. And then, like you said, there's so many opportunities where it doesn't make sense. Like, why did they keep going in the opposite direction unless they were in danger in some way? That's really the only thing I can think.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're, so there's two highways that run parallel to each other. There's 99, which is a state highway, 70, which is also a state highway. 99 runs north from Yuba City, 70 kind of runs north to the northeast out of Marysville. But there's a place where those highways kind of converge near Chico. And so they're able to get to Chico to watch the basketball game, then they leave. And it's apparent that to me, they had to be on Highway 70 because that's right next to Oroville. It's the
Hmm.
town where they would have had to exit to get on the Oroville Quincy Highway, which would have taken them over the Bidwell Bar Bridge at Lake Oroville, which would have taken them to the Plumas, which would have been the long drive up to Rogers Cow Camp area. So it it wouldn't make much sense to me if they were on Highway 99 because that's further over to the west, and they'd have to cut through some towns and cut over 70, and it, it that part doesn't make sense. It seems like they decided to take 70 home for whatever reason, as opposed to taking 99. I don't know, but it's so strange. And the more you think about it, the crazier it just gets, and the more frustrated you get trying to research this case.
Right. That's exactly how I felt the more I dug in. And I say this in my episodes a lot, the more confused I became, but also like the more frustrated I became. I was just like,
Yeah,
how sad is it that five young men that had full lives ahead of them had this tournament to look forward to, they were doing well, just vanish all at the same time in the freezing cold, pitch black, and none of it makes sense. And then, of course, like the one eyewitness we can't get a straight story. So it's just
right.
very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's still this mystery, and we're heading on to. I mean, this year was year 46 of the Yuba County Five mystery, which I can't believe. I mean, it's been that long.
I thought about that this morning, actually. I was like, I have to remind myself this was a very long time ago. This was 46 years ago. And yeah, that is crazy to me. Like, but also the men, like, obviously, if this hadn't happened, could very well still be alive. They would be in their 60s and 70s. So It's also sad that like most of their family members are not around anymore in terms of like their parents and stuff like that. And like, a lot of people that worked the case are no longer with us.
Yeah,
I
we,
wanted,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I wanted to talk to you too, because part of why I really appreciated your book is because you were so intentional about talking to the family members. And I think then, therefore, writing and telling this story in a way that like the family members would want this information to get
Mhm.
out. What was that process like for you? Like, have you talked to, um, like I know you hadn't really gone into true crime writing wise before this. Had you
Mhm.
ever had a situation like that before where you had to be really delicate kind of with who you talked to, how you worded your questions, how you got information, like sensitive topics like that? Or was this your first story where it was a little bit more, do you know what I mean? Like a little bit more sensitive?
This was the first true crime book I've written, and I've got experience with archives and records management. So I've handled Freedom of Information Act requests that
Mm,
require confidentiality and, attention to detail type work. And yeah, this was just the first time diving into a book, writing about the case. And I mean, I've done articles about history, and that's that's easy for me. This involved a lot more work and working with the families, and you have to gain their trust and let them know, hey, I'm writing a book and it's going to be about the case, and we have to tell the story about the five, and we have to get to know the five individually. So I was able to talk to four of the five families. The Sterling family hasn't talked to anyone since 1978, which is
hmm.
fine by me. I mean, that's their decision. But the other families were interested. And that took a long time to get in touch with every single person I needed to get in touch with, because some people just didn't use email. Some people had email, but you had to pick out which one was working. Same with the phone numbers. Some people were on Facebook. Some people are on Facebook, but they don't know how to use Messenger. And it's like, oh my gosh. And I even tried the old school method of writing letters to people. That didn't work either. But
Wow.
after a while, you get the right telephone number for somebody. And then once you get that telephone number, the ball starts rolling. And then working with the families became easy. It was, we didn't do everything at once. We kind of worked out ways to talk about the case because it's overwhelming for them to talk about. It's a lot of information to go over.
Mm,
So we would talk in, you know, bits and pieces here and there. We would text or email, or finally do some phone calls depending on who it was. That made that easy. And then working with the Yuba County Sheriff's Department, they gave me access to the case files, and that
right.
was huge too, working with that information. So you have to take the information you get from the case files, from the families, from the press, and sort of work the story out. And I knew I had to go um, into in chronological order because I didn't want to jump around or anything, because I thought that would confuse people or sort of get people a little bit frustrated. So it became a story where I had to like map it out and figure out like, okay, this is how we're going to do A, B, and C. So yeah, it was a lot of work. And what's funny is you talk to someone and you think, well, that I've got someone to talk to with this family, and then they come back and say, oh, you got to talk to this person. I got to talk to this person. So you're building all these relationships, and you're doing all these interviews, and it was a lot of fun. I had a great time
Wow.
befriending these people. So and we still stay in contact, which is nice.
That's incredible. I can't imagine the amount of time and work that must have been for you, but also like you said, it is rewarding and fun, like getting to make these connections in such an unexpected and such a special way.
Yeah, it was really nice. And when you said about doing all the work, I always joke because my wife and kids would always say, "Are you still working on that book? What are you doing?" And so I would have a spot set up in our dining room, just typing away, and they're like, "You working on that book? When's that going to be done? Come on now!" And they would laugh, but they knew it was getting from point A to point B, and sometimes the families would call back or send me stuff like pictures or
Mm,
items that they have of the five. And just share what they have. And then sometimes I would ask them a question for follow up or say, hey, I found the name, or I've got some information. What do you think about this? And so, I mean, that stopped the process at times, but and then life in general. I have a full-time job, have a family, have other things going on. Of course, we had like the pandemic in 2020 where all my kids are at home doing school and I'm working from home. So it's like everything gets thrown at you at once. And somehow I survived today. Okay. And
You
so
were
did my family.
determined.
Yeah, it was. And my wife was super excited to read the book. I remember her reading it. She's like, "Oh, this is getting good." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And people I know who've read the book that I know come back with questions. And there are people like yourself that I've met who have read the book, have asked me questions, and people have found me through social media and they'll say, wait a minute, what about this, this, and that? And I'm thinking, these are all good questions. And it's been a great experience. It's a lot of work, but it's fun.
How long did it end up taking you to write the book?
Uh, Writing, I don't remember. I think I started writing, like, I got serious about mapping out the book after doing a ton of interviews and looking over newspaper articles. I think it was probably 2021 to 23, but this includes things like editing the book. And I know someone who was, so I work in Grand Rapids, Michigan. There's someone in town and she was able to help me edit the book. And with the editing process, it would be spending her select chapters and then getting it back, working on that, and then getting it back to her once we had it finished. Then I got it off, into the world of publishing, literary agents and publishing companies, and then Genius Book Publishing in Milwaukee um, just said yes to the book. And I'm thinking, you're a perfect fit for me, and I'm a good fit for you. So it 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 finally was published January 2024. So it was about 2 years worth of writing, but it could have been less because sometimes you just get caught up with work and life and things like that. So it's hard to
Wow.
tell how long it would have taken if I if life doesn't happen, I guess you would say, because I think there was a kitchen remodel and all this too, and other things that are going on in life in the house, and after school events and work events, and family
Right.
vacations and stuff. So
Life.
it's all good. I'm
Yeah.
happy.
Well, I'm very happy with what you put out too. I'm curious too. I started coming across just doing all my research, Drew Beeson's book, which I haven't
Yeah,
read. Have you gotten to interact with Drew Beeson at all throughout all of this? Yeah.
yeah. So Drew has a YouTube channel, Drew Beast and True Crime. So you can
Hmm.
see some videos I've done in the past where it was called, I think he
Okay.
calls it Drew Tube or something like that. Or Drew Time instead of True Crime. Um, we've had three, maybe four live streams, but they've been archived so you can watch them in their entirety. There's one where we talk about the case. There's one where we get a couple other Yuba County 5 researchers during the 45th anniversary. Eduardo Colea from Argentina and Anthony Dunn from the UK. He joined Drew and myself to discuss the case for the 45th anniversary. We talked about the book launch, and we may have had another Drew to Yuba County 5 thing. Maybe for Files of the Unexplained. So,
Hmm.
yeah, because we've done four. So I met Drew probably 2021 because George Madruga, who's on Files of the Unexplained, said to me, "Oh, you know the other author?" And I said, "What other author?" And he said, "Someone else is writing a book." And I thought, "Oh man." But then I thought, well, you know what? Two books is better than one. But once I talked to Drew and we talked about our books, we were happy to work with each other. And at the same time, Mopac Audio was working on their Yuba County 5 documentary. And that was something where we're working with them as well to share information. They're sharing information with us. So it turned out to be a great project. And I was very happy. Drew's been a huge help. We follow leads, we come up with theories, we discuss this and that with the case. And did you ever hear this name? Do you remember that? What happened here? So we've been talking nonstop for about 3 years, and we're still in touch. We still have like a Facebook group chat going on or something like that, where there's a bunch of us talking about the case and coming up with stuff and just working on things. So Drew's a huge help, and I'm very thankful I met him and have been in touch with him over all these years.
That's awesome. That makes me happy to hear. That's really cool that you were able to connect with him and yeah, like worked out and I love that.
Yeah, and
Uh
we're both reading each other's. I've read his book, he's read mine, so and he was very excited about Files of the Unexplained, and he's become friends with the families too. So that's what's great about all this and the other guys who come out to do research. It's becoming a little bit of a nice tight knit community.
Well, I was curious. So in part three, we'll be
Hmm.
getting into all the theories and things like that. So I would love to pick your brain on those things. And I think the first thing I wanted to ask, kind of getting more towards that discussion, is in your book, you talk about a ton of sightings that people reported of the five, and they're
Hmm.
very confusing and frustrating and strange. And I was curious, what sightings, if any, did you find to not even necessarily be credible, but compelling? Like, were there any that really stuck out to you? And if so, why?
Hmm. I think the probably when Kathy Madrugas shared with me seeing Gary Mathias in a bar after the men had been found. That was probably the most compelling. The other ones that I read in the police reports or the sheriff's department reports that are in the book, everything from the store in Brownsville, the convenience store in Brownsville, not the one they went to after the game, but a different one, and then a whole bunch of sightings over California. You kind of get a feeling, ooh, these are kind of strange, a little bit bogus, maybe just people that are just way off base. But Kathy Madruga sharing her story about seeing Gary Mathias in the bar that her mom owned about a year after the men went missing was probably the most interesting and compelling one that I know of all the sightings.
Hmm. Yeah, and they talk about that one on Files of the Unexplained. My mom specifically brought that up because so my parents are both into true crime and mysteries, and so they'll watch all this stuff too. And my mom was like, "Have you watched it yet?" And she said she saw Gary Mathias in this bar a year later. It's so crazy, and
Yeah,
it is eerie. And I obviously I don't know what she saw, but I believe she believes she saw Gary Mathias too. And
exactly.
I think that in and of itself is so scary and compelling and confusing.
Right. And this has happened in other cases where people say they saw someone and are very sure of it. And I do give Kathy credit. She does say, "Look, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong." But
Sure.
to me, that was I swear I saw Gary. And she said, other people saw him at like a 7-Eleven, Montgomery Ward's, Denny's, but those sightings were never in the sheriff's report. Now, either it had been placed aside because it's evidence or something, but I just didn't see that. The only thing I saw was a man thought he saw Gary hitchhiking in the Plumas. I think it was during the summer of 1979, so it had been a year later.
Right.
But if I'm not mistaken, I think he said Gary got into a pickup truck with someone and
Yes.
drove away. And then the other one was police department or sheriff's department in Arizona and found human remains um, outside of Phoenix in the desert, and it might have been sometime early mid 1990s. They thought,
Oh.
could this be Gary Mathias? And I think when they did whatever testing they needed to do, the age of the remains compared to the age of Gary Mathias at the time was about 5 to 10 years off, and it wouldn't have worked.
Huh.
It would have been a tough fit.
Hmm.
And I think there was another discrepancy maybe with height, uh, uh, sort of measuring what they had
Sure.
as far as remains. So there's nothing in the way of I mean, there's people who claim they've seen Gary, and there's at times things are happening where you think, oh, maybe they'll find Gary, but nothing's been found just yet.
And kind of similar to that question, the other thing that you bring up in your book that I thought was really interesting is the slew of psychics that come forward,
Yeah.
all the interesting things they had to share. So, similar question from all of those reports, was there anything you found to be like interesting or compelling knowing what you know about the case, like Dr. Gloria Elizabeth Daniels' report or Marianne Elko's report? Anything that stuck out to you?
I don't know if anything stuck out. I kind of felt I was surprised they went with psychics early in March. So it would have been
Yeah.
maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks after they went missing.
Yeah,
That to
very
me was
early.
that to me would have been almost a May, early June kind of decision where they would have had all these months under their belt and they would have said, well, we've tried this. Why don't we try that? And I've heard the recording that Jackie Hewitt's mom did of the
Mm,
meeting with the psychic, and I, I I was really skeptical because it almost seemed she'd been reading the papers and was trying to use that to her advantage.
mm,
And that really that's what stood out. That when I heard that audio recording, I kind of felt like the families were getting conned by this Dr. Daniel lady who
mm.
to me was way off base. There were just some things I for some reason I think she thought Shones was dead and he wasn't because she claimed to see visions of dead people, but she thinks she saw Shones. I thought, lady, that guy didn't die.
Yeah.
And the Marianne Elko stuff, I looked through that as well. Kind of similar feeling in some ways where you kind of feel they're reaching and they're way off base. And
Hmm.
it seemed that Yuba County was willing to take any and all help. And sometimes you get help and sometimes you get the air quotes help. And
Right.
so that was definitely air quotes help. So in the
Got
end,
it.
I think they felt like they got bamboozled a little bit, like, this is not good.
Okay. That makes sense. There were some
Yeah,
other things I was hoping you could clear up for me too.
sure.
If you might not know either, but so the one of the things that just bothered me, random question, did they ever find out, do you know, whose wristwatch was in the cabin where they found Ted Weir?
No, and it was a relatively new trailer, so another person could have accidentally have left it there because
Okay.
it had been used.
Yeah.
So it could have been like a forestry worker or someone doing whatever work they were doing up in the
Okay.
Plymouth may have just, you know, before they went to sleep or they were just doing whatever, took their watch off and left it up there. Uh,
Okay.
but they never found the connection with the watch to a person. It could have been the person that was up there with them. We've talked about that.
Right.
So
Okay.
I don't want to say it's up for debate, but it's something worth checking out.
Yeah, it kind of bothered me a little bit because it was like, okay, this jewelry was Ted's. This ring literally has his name on it. These shoes are
Yeah.
Gary's. And it's like this, just this one thing sitting there. And it's like, we don't know whose this is. So it kind of stuck out to me.
Yeah. That's one of those things people keep asking. And I haven't heard anything about that watch.
Okay.
For some reason, I lean more towards someone left it there during a previous stay. It could have been another
Sure.
worker who never went back to claim their watch.
Right. Entirely possible. The other thing that I was kind of confused about, because I feel like I was getting conflicting reports in the sources I was reading. Do you know if doctors actually came out and confirmed that Joseph Shones did in fact have a heart attack? Because I know his medical records were never released, but some of the sources I read said the doctors at least confirmed to police he had a heart attack, but I was kind of confused by all of that.
I completely understand with his medical records not being available. I am of the impression they agreed he had a heart attack because in some of the press clippings that I have, I almost 100% certain they said, talking to him could trigger another heart attack. So when they said another
Right.
heart attack, and he was in the hospital. So I am under the impression they were certain he had a heart attack or maybe been under suspicion for having a heart attack. So they kept him under,
Observation.
supervisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of suspected that. So I work in healthcare, I work in hospitals, and I'm a medical speech pathologist, so I don't work in like cardiac stuff, but
Gotcha.
I do work with patients who have a lot of cardiac issues and have had heart attacks. And I was just kind of curious. And I mean, it made sense that he was under observation for 2 to 3 days. That's not uncommon when you think someone had a heart attack. But it also just was never confirmed. And we obviously don't know the timeline of like if he did have a heart attack, was it after all of this happened with the men? Was it during? Well, like he's claiming, like, but the whole story is just so odd, obviously. So
It is. Joseph Jones just adds a little something extra to the story. It's like
definitely.
the gift. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes, I love the line in your book where it's like, the police had a witness and his name was Joseph Shones. That's the good news. The bad news
Yeah.
is they had a witness and his name was Joseph Shones.
Yeah, that I came up with that while looking through the police files and just reviewing everything they had on this guy, and I thought, oh boy, because it was just one of those moments where I'm gathering all my information, and I just thought that to myself because, and even talking to his neighbor who lived near him around 1980, 1981, and
Yeah.
everything he shared. I mean, this was just like to the point, like everything that was in that police report, everything this neighbor said. And then in talking to some other people that knew him, it's like, oh boy, like I had no idea. At first, when I first heard this case, I thought that poor man, what are the odds? After a while, you begin to think, what's
Yeah.
going on with this dude? This is kind of sketchy.
Yeah.
This is very suspicious.
The car thing really bothered me, how he kept being like, I just looked in the window. Or, and then it was in
Hmm.
another report, I opened the door and I rested
Hmm.
inside. I thought about resting inside and I decided not to. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
How does this keep? And it
Yeah, the
just,
stories shift.
and him putting himself, at least in one report, in these victims' car, like it's just
Hmm.
so unsettling and odd to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. His whole story just bothers me.
And because I was talking to a podcast last week, and I said the most frustrating thing with this case is with Shones is he's probably telling 5% of the truth or 95% of the truth. And we don't know where we are with this guy because
Exactly.
everything from the pickup truck to his, you know, everything he was doing that night is just one big question mark. And he passed away 2003, 2004,
Okay.
and we'll never know anything about what he knew
Yeah.
about that case. And Lance Ayers, who was the big investigator in this case from Yuba County, he passed away around 2010, 2013.
Yes.
And that was one of the first names I went to look for. And when I found his obituary, the first thing online, that took all the wind out of my sails. And
Mm.
fortunately, I found the case files. I found people who, the family, the other members of law enforcement, other people to talk to, and that was huge.
I appreciated how you wrote about Lance Ayers in your book and how much work he had put into the case. Um,
Yeah.
I do gotta say though, and I guess I have a question too. So there's a part in your book where you talk about the conversation Lance Ayers is having with Marianne Elko and
Hmm.
Gateway Projects comes up and
Hmm.
how they knew who was responsible for the fire attacks, but nothing was done about it. How did
Right.
you feel finding that information and then knowing that he was the one that was like a big part in the investigation of the Yuba County Five?
I mean, anything with Lance was huge because he was the one that put more time and effort into the case. And the people that I talked to who are still alive know that
Hmm.
all the work Lance Ayers did, and the families were that knew of him that are still alive from the time of the case were very thankful for all the work he did. And Lance talking to Marianne Elko, the psychic, when he said that, they knew who was basically behind the attacks at the nonprofit where the 5 men went for job training and life coaching. That place had been the target of arson. The executive director had been murdered. Other
Hmm.
cars by employees had been set on fire. And in that conversation with Marianne Elko, Lance Ayers says, we pretty much know who did this. We just need to pin the case on him. We need that smoking gun, in so
Okay.
many words. So
Gotcha.
I think they knew who they wanted to get in this case, and it's still unsolved, but that they just need that missing link of evidence,
Okay.
and everything's good.
Okay. So it was more of the situation of like, we just don't have the evidence to help put this person behind bars or
Yeah,
say that they did it.
whatever they're missing,
Okay.
I don't know what it is, but apparently it had to be something big.
Okay.
And it could have been just a circumstantial case, and they could have talked to like a DA or grand jury or something and just felt, no, you don't have enough to go forward. You got to keep trying to get this right. So, and who knows what happened with that case, especially with the Yuba County 5 case, because after like 1978, it disappears.
Hmm.
And like I said, the Gateway arson and attacks, we don't know who's behind it. Um, we've tried looking into that. The Yuba County 5 researchers, we feel like we can make some headway on it, but still, it's a huge mystery.
Yeah, and just another big mystery. And I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting that when I was reading your book, and I just started reading more and more about gateway projects in your chapters. I was like, this is so interesting. I was not expecting this to come up. It's just
Well,
really
like
weird
Joseph
backstory.
Shones, yeah,
Yeah.
like Joseph Shones is like this other layer to the case where things are happening, and then you've got there's another woman who goes missing around the same time. There's like a cold case murder of teenage
Yeah.
girls in the area. There's a boy who's a
Serial
young teen.
killer, Juan
Yeah,
Corona.
Juan Coronas, the worst serial killer in America at the time, is discovered in Yuba City. There's a lot of tragedies in the area, like there's a really bad school bus crash around
Yes.
1976. So it's like you find out all these things and just kind of link some of these things. And that was the Gateway murders and arson. They tried to link the men's disappearance to that someone responsible for that maybe get paranoid and think the guys knew something and could have come across them the night on February 24th, and
Mm,
this
of
led to something. I mean, again, it's just speculation, but it's like
course.
one of those roads we try to go down and figure out, well, if they knew this and this happened, and this could be a possibility. But then again, I mean, there's so many layers to this. I think you could do like the Yuba County 5 iceberg almost. It's wild.
Exactly. Yeah,
It's
that's how I
wild.
felt about this. That's a good way to describe it. This is very much an iceberg case, a rabbit hole case.
Yeah, unbelievable.
What do you think? Again, all speculation, but like, what do you think are the chances that this was some type of foul play versus being an accident? Like, what does your gut tell you about what happens to the men?
Strong feeling of foul play, definitely. An accident, I don't buy it, because when you drive through Oroville, when you get on the Oroville Quincy Highway, you have a ton of opportunities to turn around to head back towards Highway 70, which would have taken them home. For whatever reason, they just kept going into the northish. No, not north. Yeah, it was north into the Plumas. It just doesn't make any sense. And my feeling has always been something was going wrong that night. Whatever it is, we're not going to know, but I hope someone comes forward, because in the past 4 years of research, when you talk to people, and these are people who are not connected at all, that are not close friends or anything, they'll tell you about foul play theories. And they'll tell you what they think. So the foul play is it's first and foremost in my mind because there's no other way to really explain this. Getting lost, you've you've got opportunities to turn around, you've got opportunities to find a payphone, you've got opportunities to stop and knock on the door because there are people who live in the Plumas and there was Mountain House. If they passed it, it could have been
Mm.
open. They could have gone in there to ask for help with directions and someone could have said, hey, you guys need to turn around and head south down the road you came up on. And also, they're not one for the dark. They're not one for the snow and cold. They're not one for uh, taking joy rides or anything like that. So nothing with this is making any sense whatsoever. It's super strange.
I completely agree. I feel like after I looked at everything I did, my gut goes to foul play as well. Um, I think
Exactly.
it's,
It's
and you brought up too how the families and some people that worked close to the case came up with some interesting theories. And I mean, there were even some confessions, allegedly, of
mhm,
people who were involved. Alan Martin's confession to Matthias's family, apparently.
mhm.
Todd Morgan's confession in 1994 that could possibly be linked, how he said there were 2 out of 7 quote unquote retarded males that he had murdered. He had a criminal history. The pastor in Marysville gets brought up by a bunch of people. It's all really strange.
Yeah, and like I said, this is why I lean more towards foul play. You have all of this information that comes to you from people who aren't talking to each other. So if you have all of these foul play theories, and there's more people out there that wanted to talk about it but didn't want to talk about it, it gives you the impression, okay, something happened, but people don't want to talk about it. And at first, it was easy for me to say, oh, well, they probably had an incident with Gary. But then knowing the families and knowing the five a little bit more, I don't think they would have put up with anything shenanigan wise from Gary in the car. Also, the more you hear about just all the strange things, all the sort of crazy, I guess you would call bad actors in the area, as they would call them, just these crazy tough guys with bad reputations. It
Mm-hmm.
it all just starts to build that case of foul play, but we're just missing so much information to connect point A to point B that there's really nothing else we can really lean on because you can say, well, there's the getting lost theory, but when you, like I said, the more I drive, the more times I've had to drive that road and see all the opportunities to turn around and find a payphone, and Jack Madruga not being one to divert from, the path home and getting from, Chico to Marysville was of great importance to him. And to go through Oroville just didn't make any sense. And Jack Madruga knew the area. He knew Chico. He had been there many times, according to his family. He could drive from Chico to Marysville or Marysville to Sacramento, and he never had a history of getting lost. And he was always viewed as reliable. And nothing in the report said Jack Madruga was an unreliable driver or someone with a history of getting lost. Nothing like that. People had a ton of faith in that guy, and he knew what he was doing.
Right. And it's hard to imagine someone else driving his car because he was so like in love with that car and took such good
Mm-hmm.
care of it. And the car was in such good condition when it was found. Um, so I feel like he was the one who was driving the car. That's my personal thought. I think that makes the most sense to me. And I don't think that he would have gone up to the Plumas on purpose. Like I think it was very um, intentional. I feel like they had to go up there.
Yeah, and it's always like this threat that could have forced them up that way. Like someone could have
Exactly.
threatened them, and they were probably trying to find another way home because they kind of felt like maybe they were being chased or harassed, and they knew their life was in danger. And from whatever happened, it could have been. I said this on another podcast. It could have been a chain reaction of unfortunate events. I don't buy the getting sugared up on chocolate milk and candy. I do believe there could have been a chain reaction of something bad went down that night, and it led to some things escalating and unfolding where it just got worse and worse and worse. And that's definitely a possibility. It's just getting back to that point of what was this like point of like ignition or whatever you want to call it, where, you know, everything just starts to unravel. And I think the root of all this is in Oroville. I don't think it's at Bears Market in
Mm,
Chico. I think it's in Oroville. You either stop
mm-hmm.
somewhere to use the restroom or a payphone, or to get something, maybe food wise. Maybe someone was hungry and they thought, yeah, I don't want candy. Can you stop somewhere in Oroville? And if they stopped somewhere and they ran into someone they knew or they had beef with, or they ran into someone in town who's kind of drunk and looking to fight people and seeing these guys had disabilities and maybe thought they were easy targets.
Mm.
I mean, that's a possibility too. And that's what I lean towards.
I think that's entirely plausible. I always felt like it was somebody basically chased them up there or forced them to go up there.
Yeah, and I hear that all the time too.
I guess my last big question is, do you have any theories about how long the men survived and like what their experience was like up there? Because Ted Weir, we know about how long he was alive for, but the other
Hmm.
men we obviously don't. They were badly decomposed. It seemed like their remains had been scattered by animals.
Hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
So we know Ted made it to the trailer, and the discussion that I have with other Yuba County 5 researchers and with families is who made it to the trailer. Some people say all five got to the trailer because it would be uncharacteristic of these guys to leave someone behind. But some people say Ted, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias made it to the trailer while Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga fell behind. And there could have been some sort of discussion of from Madruga and Sterling kind of assuring them, we'll meet you, we'll meet you, just move ahead, just move ahead. And I kind of flip flop on that, like how many of them made it. But
Hmm.
I definitely know Jackie Hewitt, Ted Weir, and Gary Mathias made it to the trailer.
Hmm.
It would be incredibly out of character for Ted Weir to leave Jackie Hewitt behind. Of all the people for him to leave behind, Jackie Hewitt would not make any sense. So what would happen, in my opinion, was they get to the trailer, and I believe Gary thought, I don't have medication, I could be in a lot of trouble,
Hmm.
I need to go get help. Gary leaves and vanishes off the face of the earth, and his remains are somewhere in the Plymouth. I don't know where they we don't know where they are. It's over 1 million acres of land, and there's just some parts of that area that are just inaccessible, that are just treacherous to get through, and that's where his remains could be. Jackie Hewitt probably stayed with Ted until he died and decided to go out and get help himself, and he perished. But Sterling and Madruga, I kind of flip flop. Like maybe they perished on the way to the trailer, maybe they got to the trailer,
Hmm.
they let Gary leave, and then Madruga and Sterling said, Gary's been gone too long. That this doesn't make any sense. We're going to go now. And then they perish, probably trying to walk back to the car. And then Jackie's the last one to leave after Ted Ted dies, or maybe he's in a point where Jackie realizes he's got to go get help because Ted, his remains were the only ones that, as gruesome as it sounds, were intact, and
Right.
it's an actual body that they were able to do an autopsy on. He had pulmonary edema, which was like this buildup of fluid in the lungs, if I'm not mistaken. He was badly frostbitten. There was blood poisoning. I don't know if it was gangrene or something, but it was something super serious where
Hmm.
Ted was in a bad place. And I think Jackie may have decided it was time for him to go get help. And he tried going out into the elements. So it's all part of this big mystery that people have been fascinated by and are upset by and want answers for just for the families.
I I don't know why I didn't think about, I have heard from a couple of people about Jackie Hewitt making it to the cabin, being there with Ted. I hadn't really fully thought about it before until you put it in that way of like they were attached at the hip. Like
Oh yeah.
they would not have left each other. So it's sad and scary though, just imagining them up there together, and
Yeah.
having to experience that. It also makes me feel like since Ted was found so badly frostbitten and, so ill, that again, as gruesome as it is, I feel like unfortunately the other men would have been found very similarly had their bodies been more intact. That's my thought because they were all in the
Yeah.
same elements.
And we don't know how long they were out of the car to the trailer. That's
Yeah.
another question mark. Like I talked to Shannon McGarvey, who um, did the Mopac Audio podcast for Yuba County 5, and I talked to Drew Beeson and some other
Hmm.
researchers like Anthony Dunn and Eduardo Colea, and we don't know if it was a day or two, um, or could it have been longer? Just making that walk, which would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 miles uphill in the snow, in the freezing cold. I'm a Midwesterner. I'm not going out in the snow in the freezing cold with tennis shoes, blue jeans, and a light jacket. 29 for some days for us in the Midwest. That's a nice day. That's a warm day.
Yeah.
Like we're going to roll down the windows and maybe get out the barbecue. But up in the Plumas, you got your higher elevation. I would. I'm not a scientist, but I would assume your I don't want to see what something with your breathing could be
Hmm.
impacted by at a higher elevation.
Well, and
Uh,
didn't one of the men have asthma?
Jackie Hewitt did, but he didn't have an
Yeah,
inhaler. But I don't know
he
where he
didn't.
was health wise.
Okay.
I mean, asthma seems to be something you live with, and I don't know if he had an inhaler on him. They never
I,
found
yeah,
anything.
I wondered about that actually.
Was he taking some kind of, I don't know if you take like an oral steroid for that or anything like medicine wise, other than doing an inhaler. But then again, what do I know? I'm not a pharmacist. Um, and I thought about that as well. I mean, that had to be tough on Jackie.
Yeah.
Uh, Ted, I mean, they said the pulmonary edema could be from him being at a higher elevation, or it could have been an undiagnosed heart issue or
Yeah.
some sort of medical issue that would get that going. And then Jack Madruga, when his autopsy was completed, they noticed he had broken ribs, and the ribs had been broken before he had died. So did he fall at some point?
Oh.
That he had an injury, maybe recently, where he could have injured his ribs, and it was don't know.
Uh,
And it's just part of the whole mystery of this case. And without Gary being found, it just adds to just how it looks like a simple story on the surface. And the more you research, it just gets
it's so
stranger and
not.
stranger. Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks simple, but it's horrible. And it's so frustrating. And I'm glad the families were interviewed for Files of the Unexplained. They were very happy to have finally have someone come to them and do a series, because this is the first time you get all of them on camera.
Right.
They were talking to Mopac Audio, but now you have them as well on camera, and that's huge.
That is huge. I think it's so important to consume this information in an ethical way. And I think
Yeah,
anytime that I find something where they have family involvement and they're telling their trauma and what they remember, I think that is the most compelling and the most important. So I really appreciate the work that you put into this case and how you talked about the victims, being willing to and taking the time to research their disabilities or lack thereof, the schizophrenia. Um, that I think that you did a great job. So, and
yeah, thank you. And I've found a ton of resources online. People have their own YouTube channels. I've discovered YouTube channels where people who have been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia, they talk about, their lives, their hallucinations, the issues that they may have. And It gave me a better understanding of schizophrenia. And there are people on the autism spectrum, which many people believe the men were on the autism spectrum. They have their own channels on YouTube and they talk about, their lives and their struggles and, you know, things where people underestimate them in life. So that's been huge as well. And talking to people who have lived in the Plumas and have experienced that area really helped me kind of shape
Mm,
this case. And then, of course, the families and law enforcement were huge. I mean, without them, this book wouldn't happen. I wouldn't have felt comfortable writing a book, talking to the families. They're,
absolutely.
they're great people to talk to. And
Yeah.
I'm glad that they're out there and still interested in the case. And I'm glad you did a great job on the videos that you've been doing for your channel and podcast. So it's great to see people who are taking the same route and doing Yuba County 5 research, saying we're going to get to the bottom of this, tell the story, and that's pretty awesome. There's channels from all over the world that have covered the case. And sometimes I wish, like, man, I wish I spoke a different language. I can see how much research they did with their channel and try to reach out to them, because it's great, and more people have discovered the case, and I'm very happy about it because we want to know what happened February 24th, 1978.
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts?
On the case or on
Uh,
anything in general?
in general, I know that's a very general question, but I know you said you had like an hour to an hour 15. I don't want to keep you too long. So any final thoughts or final just comments? If you want to talk about your book too.
Yeah, I mean, things aren't right. The Disappearance of Yuba County 5 is available through Amazon. You can get it through Barnes and Noble. Some libraries have it. I don't know where people live who are going to be watching this, but definitely Amazon is the place to get the book. Um, there's a Kindle version. You can get the paperback edition as well. And we're talking about doing an audio version of the book, which is the next big step in our project. I'll be going to CrimeCon in Nashville, which is end of May, beginning of June. So I'll be in
Oh,
Nashville.
I know some people
So
that are going to that. That's cool.
very cool. I hope to meet people who are interested in the case and know more. I'll be selling my book there, signing copies, um, doing some like library speaking tours. I would say a tour, but library speaking dates that I have lined up. We'll be presenting the book and reaching out to other people like yourself in true crime, just, saying thank you for all the work you've done. And I know one family definitely had a great comment for you. So that was wonderful seeing
Yes.
that.
That meant
So
a lot. That meant a lot. Thank you for telling me who that was because I didn't
yeah,
know. It's just kind of an obscure username. And I did watch some YouTube videos before I started putting all my stuff together. And I think there was someone in the comments that was talking about how there are still family members that every time one of these videos comes out, they're watching it. So
oh, there's a watchful eye. There's more than one
yeah.
watchful eye.
Yeah,
Very good.
and I mean that's kind of that ethical point I was talking about where it's like you don't know who's watching these things. It's important that you talk about them in a respectful way. I feel like that's common sense and like make sure you know what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
easier said than done for some people. But all of that to say, family members that have listened and watched and tuned in, please let me know what your thoughts are, how you feel, if there's anything I missed or you feel I got wrong, anything I left out. I'm all ears and I appreciate you listening.
Yeah. And there's a Facebook group called Yuba County Mystery. What is it called? The Mystery Yuba County 5 Mystery of the Boys or something like that. I think that's something I encourage you to check out and join
Okay.
the Facebook group, because the families are there. Other experts like Drew Beeson, Shannon's there, some other people like Anthony and Eduardo. So it's a great community. A lot of people join from watching Files of the Unexplained from all over the world. They have lots of questions. We have lots of answers that we can try to help them out with, because they only had 45 minutes to talk about the case with Files of the Unexplained, and there's only so much they could put into it. So uh, you know we're here to help, and you know I'm out on social media, on Twitter, Tony Doug Wright, Instagram, Tony Wright author. So
Yes.
I do
Thank you for
I do my
following me.
yeah, likewise. I do my best on social media. Sometimes I realize like, oh, I've got an Instagram account. I have an account with Twitter. Now they call X, and but I do more stuff with Facebook and um, connecting with so many people with the book and with the Yuba County 5 case. I meet people here. I work in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so I just connected with a podcast, and they're like, "Do you live up here?" And I said, "Yeah, let's talk about the case." And they're like, "That's awesome." So it's great connecting with people because you hear so many different theories, and people have so many different life experiences, and they have different sets of job skills and different bits of knowledge that they can bring into this, where they can tell you anything from Shones's heart attack and that sort of medical background to people who can talk about Gary and the others from like maybe the autism spectrum or maybe the schizophrenia and aspects of the cars and things like that and the plumas. So everything is just helpful. And some people think like, oh, well, we keep asking questions and we're wasting people's time. Like, no, it's good. You get the ball rolling because sometimes you see something differently with the case and you say, well, couldn't this happen or did this happen? And you think, that's a good question. Why didn't I think of that? So all hands on deck is nice. So we appreciate any and all help. And the families are, out there on social media. Some are a little bit more active than others, but they enjoy watching these videos and they do watch these videos and they definitely, some of them love to give me their takes on these. So you definitely got a gold star from them.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh. That means a lot. I started doing this at December 2022. Did not do any podcasting or anything like this before, so that means a lot. I do try hard. So
Hey, there's channels where we watch the videos and we go, oh, yeah, that's not right. Like, where are they going with this? I found one channel. I don't know what country it was, but they said the men went to a baseball game, and I immediately went, "Oh no, you're 20 minutes
Oh,
into 20 seconds into the video, and you already messed it up."
yeah.
Um,
Oh man.
so I mean, I'm like lenient on like name pronunciations and things like that. I understand,
Sure.
but when some of these videos they come out with information, you go, where did you find that information? Because I used to teach uh, community college as an adjunct teacher, and it just reminds me of the essays that I would have to write, or research papers, and see some that people have been working on them, and others were just written 5 minutes before class. And I kind of feel the same way about podcasts and YouTube videos. Like, what did you do? Are you just making this up as you go along?
Right.
So it, it's the joys of the modern age. So it is
Yeah.
what it is. But
That's true.
I'm glad.
We're in the information age. It can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, some of this stuff travels a little too fast, and I think other people catch on or like watch those videos and like, oh, that's fact, and we're like, no, this is wrong. So I'm so happy that people like yourself are putting in the research, doing what you can do to learn more about the case, and that's key because the misinformation is stuff that the families are trying to get, wiped out, and the real information we're trying to get to the people so they can say, oh, okay, well, this is how we can help with the case.
Exactly. Well,
It's
Tony, thank you so much for your time.
yeah. Thank you, Pedro.
Everybody, absolutely. And everybody who wants to learn more about this case, I would definitely encourage you to read Tony Wright's book. Check out Drew Beeson's book as well. I need to read it now. I've been reading a bunch of like excerpts from the book online, but now I'm like, I'm just gonna read it. And thank you for telling me about that Facebook group. I'll have to check that out, Tony.
Yeah, please do. Please join us. Like anyone who watches your channel and is on your Patreon page, please do so. We're a very welcoming group. We ask people to respect the families and theories and
Yes,
not throw out speculation and names and stuff like that. So if you're good with that, we're good with you, and we're here to talk about the case.
absolutely. Well, thank
Awesome.
you, everybody.
Yeah.
Tony Wright, author of Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five. This is a very special guest. Outside of like other podcasters, you are my first like kind of expert to have, So
There
thank
you
you
go.
very much.
Hey,
And
thank you.
I I would be happy to correspond with you more in the future. And yeah, I'll check out the Facebook group.
Yeah, and I'll put you in touch with some fellow Yuba County 5 researchers, and you can sort of jump down the rabbit hole with us. And like I said, we appreciate any and all help on this. So people who are ready to do their homework, get ready, roll up your sleeves, and there's a lot to do.
Yeah. Fantastic.